and welcome back to episode 3 of the Life and Mission of St. Mary Euphrasia. We're joined again today by our friend Courtney Lucas. I wish I could have been with you to talk about your reflections from episode 2. What did you discover? What do you think about Rose Virginie?
Something I had never thought about before was how much an environment could shape a personality. The freedom that Rose experienced growing up on that island really made her much more independent than most women of that time.
You're absolutely right about that. I could really relate to the example set by her parents. So when I was a child, probably around 6, my mom decided that our family would host refugee families from Cambodia who were escaping a really brutal government at the time. Families would come and they would live with us for a while, and my mom would teach them English and how to shop and help them find their own homes. We didn't have a big house, but I remember my mom telling me that no matter what you have, it can be shared with someone else. I've never forgotten that, and I even think that it was that lesson that helped lead me to Good Shepherd. I think all of us can probably think of examples in our own lives that helped point us in this direction.
What an amazing lesson to learn as a child. I'm looking forward to picking back up in our story. We're starting to see the early influences in Rose's life that shaped her as an adult. She seemed to have had a very good starting out, even though her family had been traumatized and separated through the French Revolution. She had the example of her parents, the freedom of the island, and a loving family, good friends, and strong faith.
That's right. But then we start to see the breakup of her family, which had always been a source of strength for her. So when Rose was 9 years old, her sister, Victoire Emily, died. When she was 10, her father died. And some say that he had died of a broken heart because he was a doctor and he wasn't able to save his daughter. Shortly after that, her oldest sister, Anne Josephine, moved to Ceylon to live with an aunt to prepare for marriage. And in addition to her sisters, her 2 older brothers went off to war. So Rose Virginie was left the only girl at home, along with her younger brother, Paul. Being the only 2 children left at home, and particularly the only girl in the home, Rose and her mother drew much closer.
That's so much loss and grief in such a short period of time. That must have been difficult. I didn't know that Rose would be able to relate so much to some of those in the Good Shepherd programs.
Yes. Sometimes people wonder what a saint could possibly understand about the trials of some of the people that Good Shepherd serves. And yet Mary Euphrasia was incredibly ahead of her time when it came to caring for children and women. Perhaps it's because she was not so different from them. Later in life, she said it was for but the grace of God that she did not go another way. So we're starting to hear some of the sadness and trials in her young life. When Rose was 13, a school opened on the island run by nuns. Although she was incredibly bright and intelligent, Rose had trouble adjusting to going to school. This was a young girl who had known unrestrained freedom her whole life. Her mother had to march her to school. And Rose must have acted up a lot because she caused one teacher to exclaim in exasperation, "I don't know what will become of you. You will either grow up to be a devil or an angel." To which Rose replied, "I will be a nun."
Was she serious? Did she really feel a calling to be a nun at such a young age?
Well, it's certainly possible. Remember, she was very religious, and she seemed to have very little interest in growing up to be a wife and run a household. There were not a whole lot of options for women at that time. So now as a teenager, we enter the darkest part of her life. When Rose was 14 in 1810, her mother decided to leave the island and move back to Ceylon. Rose had to say goodbye to the only world that she knew.
Why would her mom do that?
Well, we can't blame her. Noirmoutier was never her home. It was a place of imprisonment. So with her husband gone and most of her children, it's not surprising that she would want to go back to where her family was. But it was like the end of the world for Rose. It was the only place she had known up to this point. We can imagine how difficult the transition would be of living on an island with freedom to the constraints of being on the mainland. Madame Peltier did not find the schools in her hometown of Ceylon to be suitable for Rose, so she sent her to a boarding school in Tours. If we look on the map and we remember that there were not good roads or fast trains at that time, the journey was said to take 3 days and 3 nights by coach. Madame Peltier chose the school in Tours because it was run by one of her own school friends, Madame Chaubelet. The two had reconnected at the wedding of Anne Josephine. Madame Peltier likely thought Rose would have a second mother, but Madame Chaubelet was very firm and strict with Rose. She probably believed she was being motherly by offering Rose a firm hand to curb the girl's strong will, but she failed to nurture this fragile, vulnerable teen who was suffering the effects of severe grief, loss, separation, and possibly depression. Rose was a very sensitive child and was also very close to her mother. As an adult, Mary Euphrasia's sisters said that she could never talk about her mother without tears in her eyes. She said of going away to Tours, "I cried so much, I could not understand how they could send me so far away."
I'm thinking about how difficult and lonely that must have been for Rose. She spent years being close to her mother, and then to be separated from her must have been so hard. Do we know much more about how things were at the boarding school?
So Rose was a very unhappy teenager living in an unfamiliar and somewhat unfriendly environment. She had left her familiar home, the island, and was separated from all of her friends and family. She had been able to run free on Noirmoutier, and now she was in a very closed environment where she couldn't even leave the school without permission and a chaperone. She tells us later that the teachers grumbled at her and upset by her thousands of observations, and she found that hard to take. Madame Chaubelet was very strict with her, which is not what she was used to. We really shouldn't be too hard on Madame Chaubelet, though, because we have to remember that although she had been friends with Madame Pelletier, she too had been traumatized by the French Revolution. Rose stayed at Madame Chaubelet's school for 4 long years with no breaks or holidays. Rose's intelligent, capable, curious, and sharp mind was not appreciated. This boarding school was not like schools as we know them today. Remember that women in that age did not get the same education as men. At Madame Chaubelet's school, she would have learned things like how to be pleasant and charming, especially to a husband, how to run a house and direct servants, and how to behave in polite society. These are not things that our Rose was very interested in. Education was about fitting her for society and not the development of her intellect. The one class that she did seem to enjoy and actually learn something from was religion class. We know that she even won an award for it. She was so smart that her classmates and some of her teachers nicknamed her the Little Doctor. She continued to be pious. Her faith and religion were very important to her, and this set her apart. Some of the older girls used to throw pieces of bread at Rose in the dining room and taunt her because she had expressed a desire to become a nun. Some of the students in the school made fun of Rose Virginie because she looked and spoke differently. Her skin was darker from being outside on the island, and at this point in history, young ladies had very fair skin and never let the sun tan them. Rose also had an accent which singled her out.
Wow, it doesn't sound like situations could get much worse.
Well, unfortunately, it did get worse. When Rose was 17, her mother died very suddenly. The officials at the school didn't get word to Rose until after her mother was buried on the island of Noirmoutier with her husband. Her brother-in-law became her guardian. This was Anne Josephine's husband. Remember that women had no rights and no identity on their own, and Rose needed, according to society, the protection of a man. And her guardian decided not to let Rose come home to be with the family, but that she should remain at school.
What did she do to cope with all of this?
Well, according to her own words, she said, "I turned seriously to God and looked for consolation in piety. At the end of 6 months, I felt a great attraction for the religious life." She also said again that were it not for the grace of God, she would have gone another way. Thankfully, there was a bright spot. Among these teachers was a young woman who reached out to Rose and saved her from falling into low spirits. Mademoiselle Pauline de Lignac became interested in her and took her under her wing and helped her understand that she was a good person in spite of the tragic events of her life. She listened to Rose, she saw her gifts, and she challenged her. She renewed her hope. And she was only 19. They became good friends and spent a lot of time talking about their shared interest in religious life. Across the street from the boarding school in Tours was a very mysterious place surrounded by a tall stone wall. The girls at the school were told mysteriously that that was where the bad girls went. Well, this piqued Rose's interest. In fact, the place was called Our Lady of Charity of the Refuge. And Our Lady of Charity had been founded by St. John Eudes in 1666. In our next episode, we'll see Rose Virginie's entrance into Our Lady of Charity of the Refuge, her time as a novice, and how she grew into a leader. But before that, I'd like to invite you to take some time and reflect on what we've learned about Rose Virginie's difficult teenage years. These experiences are the things that most likely developed her philosophy of how to be in relationship with the girls she would later serve. Later in life, she taught her sisters and said things like, "Always lift them up in their own eyes. Whatever the color of their tears, they are always bitter. And always be delicate with them. Speak with great gentleness and politeness. I beg you, for the love of God, never say anything to your children which could hurt their feelings. And it is not enough that you love them. They must know that you love them." It seems that Rose didn't want other people to experience the harsh treatment and sadness that she did. So now, again, I invite you to think about your own life. There will be some questions for your own reflection in a moment. Take some time to think about the struggles in your life, what you learned from them, and who helped you in those. If you're in a group, take some time to share with one another what you discover. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in our next episode.